Essentially, I held a sign that said, "We are not living in a rape culture in the West," which we are not. It is intellectually dishonest to think that we are living in a rape culture. Rapes do happen, but the vast minority of men and women are rapists. And when we do find out they're rapists, they go to prison, they are punished. Whereas in the third world countries and other places, men can get away with rape there.
No means no! No means no! No means no!
You are attacking our cameraman. Yeah.
Nah, he was the one who touched me first.
Excuse me.
Oh, come on.
So you went to the Slutwalk, which for those who don't know, began around 4 years ago off the back of a comment made by a Toronto police officer who basically said that women would be less likely to be raped if they didn't dress like sluts. It's become a huge thing, numerous cities across the world. I think it was best summed up by an NRO article which I read, which called it a legitimate grievance that empowers a movement of irrational hatred. And as he said, it's this idea that men have to be reminded every day not to be rapists. And, you know, how is a costume party, which is essentially what this has become, disguised as a protest, how is that going to stop actual rapists who aren't even going to pay attention to any of this? How is it going to deter actual rapists? Because it's, you know, in the long run, it's only going to harm gender relations by making men petrified of intimacy and making women petrified of men. So you go there to basically challenge this entire narrative. You hold up the sign saying there's no rape culture in the West. Tell us what happened after that.
Well, I just walked up there silently and held my sign. And I've been to events before that have been protested by people who disagree. And at the events I've been to, usually there are a few people that disagree with signs and they'll stand there. Sometimes they'll yell everything. So I figured it wouldn't be that big of a deal, actually, if I went there and held the sign. I wasn't sure how they would react. But what happened eventually was a lot of the participants and girls that were there, it was mostly females, obviously, they came up the steps and started trying to hide my sign with their signs. And when I'd move to one side of the steps, they would walk over that way and hold up their sign trying to hide me. And they were yelling at the media, telling them not to pay attention to me. And eventually they started actually talking to me and yelling at me, and we got into a bit of arguments. One girl threatened to punch me. My sign was eventually torn up, the sign that said there is no rape culture in the West. And everyone who I talked to after that was pretty angry and malicious towards me. In fact, after they found out that I did not agree with the narrative of the walk, they tried to withdraw their consent of footage that I had taken in interviews I had done, comparing me filming them and not getting rid of the footage after to rape.
There's a group of women that were here and they're wishing to withdraw consent to use the footage that you had, I guess, gotten. So can you please make sure that is done and make sure that any of the stuff that they have...
We may or we may not use the footage. It is a public area, so we do have legal rights to use the footage.
But you interviewed them specifically, right? So
yes, and they gave us consent to interview them.
Well, now they're withdrawing it, so...
That's not how it works, but...
Which is interesting given the event that you're at, right? That's a little bit contradictory.
What do you mean it's a little bit contradictory?
Well,
I totally say that's not how it works.
Well,
you can't just withdraw consent the next,
Well, that's interesting.
Why is that interesting?
It's just, I don't know.
No. Tell me why.
Like a rally for rapists, consent and withdrawing consent, saying no means no. They're saying no, and you're saying that
Okay, so if someone gives consent the night before, and then they have listen. If they have sex with a man and they give consent to him, then the next day decide, oh, I regret it. I'm going to report him for being a rapist, even though I gave him consent. You're saying that's okay?
So you're sounding a little bit like a 12-year-old because this is irrelevant.
One of them challenges you on your statistics, which is pretty ironic given that this entire movement is based around this complete baloney that 1 in 5 college women are raped. College women are actually less likely than women in the normal population to be raped. The actual studies that was based on are drawn out of CDC headcounts where they count people who've had consensual sex who are high on drugs or drunk as rape. So it's completely misleading. It has been for years, yet they're still parroting it. You had somebody challenge you on your statistics. She said, you know, what about the vast majority of rape cases that are not reported? Just tell us how you responded to that individual in particular.
Well, I responded by saying that in Canada, every 100,000 people, there's only 1.7 individuals who actually report rapes, which I think is relevant to the rape culture discussion. And she began talking about rapes that weren't reported, and she stated that there are 10%, only 10% of rapes are reported. And I find those stats of how many are and aren't reported, first of all, none of them are actually, we don't know whether they happened or not, because there wasn't an investigation that went into them. They could have been false claims. It's just there's so much up in the air with those stats and studies. And I looked into it a bit after, and even RAIN, which is obviously a more biased place to get statistics, puts that number at 36%. So I have no idea where she got her 10% statistic. I think she just pulled it out of her ass, to be honest, despite her calling me a pseudo reporter and all of my pseudo statistics and everything. It's honestly, I have so much trouble believing feminists or radical leftists when they present me with statistics, especially on topics of rape, sexual assault, and gender pay gap, all of these, because every time I look into them, there is something missing. Every time I look into them, there is something off, something that has been skewed to portray a certain narrative. Like you've said, the 1 in 5 study has been looked into and debunked so many times, yet they keep perpetuating it. That's why I find it funny that she brought up statistics, like you were saying, because they don't care to look into the statistics and see if they're real. They've got an agenda, and they're going to scream and shout and run around in bikinis all day until people start treating them like victims and give them special treatment and privileges and entitlements. But
and there was another one on there who said that these YouTube videos about this guy who hijacks live news broadcasts and says, you know, F her right in the pussy, was an example of rape culture, when that is a known hoax. Everybody knows that that's a hoax, yet she cited that as an example of rape culture.
Do you actually think we live in a rape culture?
Unfortunately, I think so. I was actually just chatting with my friend about even, you know, the viral craze going on where people come up to reporters such as yourself and are saying that awful phrase to the live cameras, that's F her right in the P, and that kind of language that is considered funny is something that, you know, it might seem like an innocent thing at the time, but it's just an example of how the language we use is absolutely involved with rape culture.
It might be offensive, it might be unpleasant.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's an example of rape culture.
even if it was happening all the time, constantly, and it was happening to every reporter ever, that would not be a rape culture. That's still an exaggeration. Comparing having names called at you or having offensive things yelled at you to being brutally raped, it's so wrong in my opinion.
And it denigrates actual rape victims. Of course, real rape victims in real rape cultures, which feminists don't like to talk about because sometimes it's not politically correct, examples being in Rotherham, where we had white girls being abused by Pakistani rape gangs and the police covering it up and protecting them, or in countries like Denmark and Sweden, where the majority of violent rapists are foreign-born immigrants. They don't really like to talk about that, do they? Because they can't blame it on the evil white Western male patriarchy. Exactly.
And especially also it can be offensive to question other cultures, which is, I think, what you were probably getting at. And it's fascinating, too, because this does absolutely nothing for even rape victims here. I don't think it represents women who have been brutally raped here, or at least a lot of them, especially women and men who took precautions. Now, I'm not saying I support victim blaming or saying that it's someone's fault if they get super drunk and have sex, or it's someone's fault if they dress inappropriately and get raped, but I am adamantly against standing and speaking up against taking precautions, because what about all of the women who took precautions, who were just walking home from work? Running around in bikinis and saying, don't blame me for being drunk, doesn't represent those people. It doesn't represent the women who were raped when they took precautions, in my opinion, yeah.
And of course, the major cases that come out, that arise out of this so-called rape culture, like the UVA rape Hoax, Mattress Girl, and others, they always completely collapse. And in fact, it ruins the lives of the people that are falsely accused. So those are the great fruits that have been born from this aggressive promotion of rape culture. But you post the video of this, it goes viral. It got, over 700,000 views last time I looked, probably more by now. Then there's this online hate campaign basically launched against you. There's a petition. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so they started a petition, and even before the petition was released to have me removed as a libertarian candidate, they had sent letters just filled with lies and slander about me to friends of mine, to every single member of the Libertarian Party, to just everyone I knew. Like, I don't know if they've looked at my Facebook friends list or if they can even see that, but they managed to just get this slander out. And I had so many people coming up to me and asking me, hey, were you screaming at rape victims and telling them that their rapes didn't happen? And I'm like, no, that didn't happen. And one of the letters I got, in fact, it was this huge, just crazy letter that was sent to me as well, about how this girl talks about how she feels like a mama lioness protecting all the feminists from the evil wolf, which was me, just absolutely insane, and talks about how she was so triggered she starts puking all night. And I just, like, the most insane letters you've ever seen. And then they wrote the huge petition to get signed to get me kicked out of the party. And eventually I took the extra footage that I had from the event, and I showed that I stood there silently at the beginning. I don't know if you saw my video, what really happened at the Slutwalk. And I showed that I stood there silently, and all their claims were debunked, essentially. And they still continue to say that I spliced the footage and I somehow edited the footage to make it seem like I didn't yell at rape victims and tell them to check their privilege. So I don't know, it's just insane. I don't understand how they can lie so blatantly, and I really don't think being representatives of an assaulted, of raped women really does them well to go around lying about people. It really doesn't help, especially when there have been so many false reportings about rape, because if they're going around and lying and slandering people, it just makes it that much more difficult to believe these individuals when they say, hey, I was raped by this man. So if you're going to be the representative of this group that you want people to believe and trust when they make claims, don't go around slandering and lying about people,
Yeah, and that also arises out of this other issue, which is related to this, rape by fraud, which I made a video about a few months ago, in which they basically claim that even with consensual sex, if it later emerges, God knows, days, weeks, months, even years down the line, that the man, in most cases, lied about any aspect of his identity or age before the consensual sex happened, that constitutes rape. And they even introduced, or tried to introduce, a law in New Jersey to actually put this into action, that people could be charged years down the line on a par with actual rapists, simply for things like lying about their age or lying about their family status, which again can be hurtful, can be offensive. But to denote that as rape is just completely abhorrent to actual rape victims.
Oh, man, yeah, I was talking about this on the Honey Badgers podcast. I'm not sure if you know of them. And there was a case that came up recently where a young girl lied about her age to a guy and said she was legal age, and they had sex. And he is in huge trouble right now with the law, because they're saying that was essentially, he had sex with a minor, even though she lied to him. So he's the one in trouble, even though she's the one who lied to them. So it's weird how this applies only to men, it seems. If a woman lies and hides herself in a bunch of makeup, or takes her Tinder photos to make herself look different and edit herself and everything, if she lies about her job, it seems to only apply to men, this whole consent thing. You look at the rape case with Mattress Girl. It was released later that she had essentially raped him, yet you don't see the crowds running and supporting him. When two people have sex and they're both drunk, it's always the man who's blamed for rape, even if they both didn't consent. We're living in it's because of this exaggerated victim culture in feminism that we don't support both groups, that we don't look at things objectively, that we instantly support the woman and instantly try to find reasons for why the man is wrong, whether it's she withdrew consent later, whether it's what you're saying, that he lied about something. They're constantly looking for ways to make it seem like the man is always wrong or always the rapist. And it's so wrong, in my opinion, so wrong.
And just to broaden this out, you know, obviously I've made a lot of videos about feminism. One of the common criticisms I get is that, you know, these people are just silly, they're radicals, they're on the fringe, just ignore them, they have no influence. Which I have to emphasize again and again is clearly not true. You know, we've got Hillary Clinton, who is about to run on a presidential campaign, which she's probably going to win, on a platform of, you know, the debunked gender wage gap, all kinds of other feminist issues. So we've got all the feminists behind her. She's going to be a major source of influence for them. We've also got feminism right in the bowels of the education system. We've now got mandatory gender studies classes in a lot of American colleges. So from your perspective, and you'll know this better than me, how do you respond to the people who say, oh, just ignore them, they're just insane radicals, when this really seems to be a force, this third wave feminism, in the lives of young women who are exposed to it in college? How much of a force do you think it really is?
I've had feminism shoved down my throat my whole life, so I really don't know what they're talking about. It's, even if these are radicals, and some feminists are radicals, I'd say a lot of feminism in general here seems to be quite radical, but even if you did attribute them to a small minority, that minority has a lot of power. They have control over the government. They've got affirmative action in place. They've got, like you're saying, mandatory gender classes. Feminism is in the curriculum in high schools and universities. And people who don't even agree with feminists still won't speak out against them because they're too afraid of this hate mob. If you speak out against feminism or say anything remotely, even if it's just humor that could be perceived as sexist, because this group has so much of a hold on society and people are so afraid of being anti-feminist, you look what happened to me for being anti-feminist, whether they are a radical few or not, they hold power. And eventually, if they continue to run the institutions, if they continue to be in government, if they continue this, so many people are so apathetic and just kind of follow where society goes that they'll just see it as the norm. They'll see feminism as what is widely accepted. So regardless of whether these are radicals, they are making change in areas that will affect the mindset of the majority, and already has, in my opinion.
And again, it's a movement that's incredibly harmful to the idea of strong, independent women. As your video illustrated, you know, they surround themselves with people who parrot their views. They cannot tolerate being challenged to the point of bullying and authoritarian intimidation tactics and outright lies, as we saw in the aftermath. So instead of responding to, you know, being challenged with facts and cogent debate, they bleat on about, you know, trigger warnings and jazz hands and safe spaces, again, completely ridiculing the very basis of what feminism was supposed to be about way back at the beginning, which was about strong, independent women making their own choices. And there's also this other bizarre contradiction where you get sex-negative feminists who say that, you know, female video game characters who look sexy, that's wrong, that's evil, that's misogynistic. You know, they're pressuring to ban booth babes and grid girls at Formula One events. They're censoring the Athena tennis girl poster. And yet on the flip side, they say that dressing like a slut is empowering to women. How do you reconcile this sex-negative puritanism with the opposite, which completely contradicts that? Yeah,
and porn is empowering as long as men aren't watching it, all this crazy stuff. And I just really want to see a war between the two, the sex positive and the anti-objectification. I'd love to see that. I really liked, did you see Chris Pratt's comment? He said we don't need to stop objectifying women, we just need to objectify men more. I thought that was kind of funny. But back to, I wanted to talk about the empowerment thing quickly, because that was something that seriously stood out to me, especially on feminist groups on my campus, the feminists that were at the walk. I derailed their walk just by sitting there with a different opinion on a sign silently. They were screaming and utterly outraged, could not think logically for a second. I got messages from people telling me they were crying, that they were so triggered. That doesn't sound empowered to me. When I was in my women's group on campus, people were saying they're uncomfortable and it's triggering and this isn't a safe space that I'm in the group, questioning the gender pay gap. And that's not empowered. Not being able to listen to other opinions, that's not, and it comes from the institutions that have been filled with radical hippies from the 70s. It comes from that. It stems from that, telling women, you are victims. Everyone is against you. The patriarchy is against you. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're told your whole life you're a victim, you're going to see sexism everywhere. Everything a guy says, if you'll take it in the wrong way, you'll see it as you're a victim. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's a confirmation bias. And that's what's happening to these women. I refuse to buy into that. And I see myself, I don't feel oppressed in the least by this fake patriarchy. I feel empowered, and I refuse to listen to this narrative of I'm a victim because I'm a woman. I go and I work and I get a job. I work and I get into university. I'm going to, being told the victim mentality and abandoning the victim mentality is probably the most empowering thing women can do. If women decide to go and just do things and believe they can do it, ask for that raise, that will get rid of the pay gap. Not pretending that we're in a patriarchy. That has just caused for women to go and register in gender courses and complain all day. So that's some big beef I have with feminism. Not in the least empowering.
If they're taking gender courses rather than science, then they're less likely to be mobile in those upper echelons of education and the jobs market. So it's, again, like you said, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's this idea that they have to live in this state of permanent victimhood, continually making excuses for themselves, when we live in a meritocracy. If they really go for it, then they can achieve just as much as men. And, you know, more women are now graduating from college as compared to men in a lot of areas. So that's proving correct. Just summing up, tell us about your channel, tell us about Rebel Media, because you're quite new on the scene. So just explain to folks how that's going.
Well, yeah, I got asked to do work with Rebel or volunteer with Rebel probably 3 months ago, and that's when I came out with my I'm Not a Feminist video. And I'm just volunteering. I'm still a student, so I'll probably just keep making videos, just maybe not as often, but I'll still be talking about gender issues and everything on Rebel. And I will be talking about them on my personal channel as well, so I can have a bit more of a, which is Lauren Southern. If you just look up my name on YouTube, you can probably find it. I just film them in my pajamas, sit there, talk about gender issues. I don't know, I never really saw myself as being much of a reporter, but I think these are important issues, so I'm speaking up on them, and a lot of people seem to care, which is cool. It's good, because I don't get heard a lot on a university campus that is primarily very socially, culturally left-wing, which I don't think it's much more authoritarian, I guess. Yeah, but I will certainly be coming out with more content. This isn't my job. I work a full-time job and am at school, so I can't do this all the time, but I think it's important that everyone speaks up, and if other people feel strongly about these issues, I'm not a professional reporter, I'm just a student. I think everyone can speak up and should be going out to these events, and that's how we'll get real social change.
Well, you've certainly made an impact in the short time. You've had, what, 3 viral videos within the space of 2 or 3 months, so that's very impressive. So we'll leave it there. Lauren Southern, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.